Alright, let's talk about presenters. So I'm sitting here with the generic RESTful presenter. It's kind of the core of the whole presenter hierarchy. You can see there's a result-free successor error presenter, which inherits from the generic RESTful presenter and also implements an interface. I respond with no result successor error. I think the thing that maybe is potentially slightly misleading with this is I kind of thought of the best name I could at the time. I really would like some input if you can think of some better names for things. I think it would help people in the future. But it's heart and soul of the generic RESTful presenter is the idea is that it basically knows how to send an iAction result back, because presenters work off the concept that I can present any type of information, and I can, as long as I adhere to the interface, I can do pretty much anything I want with that information, and I can render it however makes sense for the output. The idea being really I can return an object on success, or I can return an error on success, and it helps you kind of start streamlining that error response strategy. And things like Angular, you can just say, oh, here's the properties, bind to it, display the message, make things great, type of thinking along the way. So the idea behind the generic RESTful is obviously the fact that it handles an iAction results. So we could have a file presenter that was responsible for writing results to a file. There's kind of a case for that. I think I've kind of teetered around that concept before, but on this scenario, mainly because we're so web focused, generic RESTful presenters are our underlying presenter. So back to this result-free successor error. So the idea here is that only if there's an error am I going to respond with some kind of error message. Otherwise, just simply calling respond without passing it anything is going to return an OK. Everything's good. So I don't care about the result. This is some maybe fire and forget. I don't know. Think about maybe a use case that sends an email. That's a bad one. I probably do care about the result there. Maybe I need to start a background process. It's going to start or not. If it's not, it should return me an error. And if it did, don't return me anything, because I'm just going to assume you started. Where's another one here? We've got a success or bad request. So the idea being very similar. It's either going to respond, presenters in general, it's either going to respond with success. So in this case, it's going to say, hey, cool, there's some success output. Or it's going to respond with a bad request. So in this case, it's not necessarily responding with an error. It's only responding with success information. And in the case where it was unsuccessful, it's responding with a bad request. Think like a login. Maybe I just want to say bad request. Or successfully return some information if they were good. So I guess this is actually the inverse of the success result-free. This is kind of a no error or message on success. Successor error RESTful presenter. This is kind of the heart and soul of a lot of what we do with the presenters here. So the idea is always with the presenters is going to be some kind of success, some kind of error. This was on the previous one, but I'll take the moment to explain it here. So this is a boundary function, and this comes in through the constructor, and this is a way of kind of protecting, in this case, the web boundary. So whatever's coming into my controller and out of my controller can be completely decoupled from the domain, which is really the core essence of the clean architecture. A lot of people who have a domain, quote unquote, basically have database models that they just throw around everywhere. I'm not saying it's the wrong way to do it, but you do end up with some weird corners and things that get tacked on when they shouldn't, and especially if you start trying to put methods where the data is, and it feels weird. And to be honest, that's where we first started with this whole thing. Gosh, what was it, 4 years ago now? We did that in the first version, and kind of this has evolved since and taken a lot of lessons out. So the idea is, with the boundary function, is to really be able to separate your boundary, your input, in this case the controller, from what's happening in the domain, the use cases, everything else. It's more business logic focused. Successor unauthorized, very similar to the successor bad request. I mean, you could make your own. I mean, there's no reason why they have to just be in this library. a few other interesting ones. Download file presenters, so you want to present a file for download. And just error. You just want to only ever return errors. There's an error RESTful presenter for that. So basically, the contract would be that it needs to implement one of these types of interfaces. The I respond with type of. No, that's not the right way to get there. Mainly because that depends on the compiled DLL at the core. Clean architecture depends on the compiled DLL NuGet package, so everything stacks up nicely. What we're talking about presenters. Let's go to look at the presenter. So there's a few unique presenters here sitting in the domain that aren't sitting down in the core package, mainly because they're pretty essential, and it would be really weird to have to include the other package to get them when often you're just working at a domain level. So the favorite is the property presenter. This is very useful for testing or some kind of inter-use case type of mechanism. So I've got use case A that contains use case B and C, and I want to call B and get the result and pass that to C, but they both take different types of presenters. You can use the property presenter to call B, get the content out, put it into an input object, and send it through to C. Or I think at one point I was playing, yes, with a inter-use case presenter. The idea being that basically you've got a conversion function to take the output and convert it into the presenter format, or the input format that the other use case expects. This, I would say, shortish lived, mainly because it was a very specific scenario, and soon after this I realized I was being silly for all these years about how to actually do better transactional stuff, and I realized there's a thing called Saga, so I built the little Saga engine. So this kind of became irrelevant. So it's here just because I know there's one or two projects I have in existence that require it. Anything else I want to talk about? No, I mean, the presenters, like I said, as long as they stick to that core interface contract, everything's good. Okay, so if we come down here to the domain, let's start looking at the interfaces. iResult free action. Oh, let's oh. Yes, I've put it in the output folder. I was like, where are my interfaces? So there's an I respond with no results, I respond with result on success, HTTP status code on error. This is used by a few of the presenters. Or our favorite, I respond with success or error. All it inherits from our respond with, which takes an error. So the idea being the I respond with error is the kind of the core essence. Remember that kind of standardized message handling. And then the I respond with like success is like, hey, cool, I'm going to tack onto that. So I'm going to say you're going to do something cool when there's success. Otherwise, obviously, if there's an error, the standard thing is to admit the error. And using generics, we can do that and chain everything together nicely. I respond with no result on success, status code on error. So the idea here is just an empty respond method for success. In fact, I don't see why these two couldn't be the same. They probably came into existence at very different times, but maybe I was trying to do something clever with naming. I'm not sure. And there's this weird, funny little file output thing sitting here, and this is really around the download, just a generic way of kind of representing that information, mainly because we needed this in a scenario, and it's nice to be able to test stuff. I mean, it really is. And as long as there's a common contract, it makes it pretty easy to make sure that this is doing close to what it should be doing. And as you may have noticed here, I didn't really mention it, if there isn't a specific response, the presenter throws an error saying no response specified. So if you're ever using the presenters and you see that, it basically means you forgot to call the respond method somewhere in your chain. It's probably the only real caveat with working with presenters is at some point you've got to tell it this is what you want to respond back with. Maybe some of these things could be more intelligent if there's no response, like, it just assumes. But this core of the system's at least 4 years old. I haven't really gone back to doing this other than kind of adding new presenters. So if you did want to add a new presenter, I don't know, called my really awesome presenter that does cool stuff, The idea would be, if it's RESTful, inherit from the generic RESTful. But like I said, you could do the same successor unauthorized and have it print to a console or, I don't know, WPF app or whatever you're working with. You just need to change the underlying base class, and you can still use all the interfaces and everything. Because the underlying base class is the thing that's actually doing the rendering to the type that boundary is expecting. And I say boundary, I mean controller or console or any other way of getting input from the user. You could do an XML one, I guess. That would be the other probably most sensible thing for web, unless you wanted to come with some really new, cool, funky file format that hasn't yet been discovered. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. I can't say there's any test on the presenters. So there was once upon a time in the project these came from, just due to... now there's a test. Yeah, I do have them. Oh, okay, I did bring them through. I was like, man, I'm pretty sure I did bring them through. So yeah, you can always have a quick look at the test to kind of understand how they work. But like I said, if the naming is confusing, let me know. I'm very happy to come back and improve this. In fact, I think about a year ago I said the same thing to Trev, and we just never got around to it. So this is time number 2. Maybe we should make an effort to make that happen if things need to be a little clearer. But like I said, I do want to do some documentation, whether that's in form of written documentation or maybe a series of videos that kind of digs into the clean architecture concept and how all these pieces fit together. Just because this is deviated, I'd say, a fair bit from how most people tend to implement things and think about it. But if you really look at Uncle Bob's clean code book, not his clean coder or even his clean architecture book, you can start to see how the things he values there, those principles that he values, start to show up in this type of architecture. I've read the clean architecture book. I give it a miss, man. It's highly theoretical and very hand wavy. I mean, there's some interesting things where he does try to establish metrics, but like they're so esoteric and like academic that it's hard to get people to see them in their day-to-day life. And I think getting people to see this and understand the value in thinking about writing code this way starts to make a really testable, decoupled architecture at the end of the day, which are two really important things regardless of what you want to call it. Anyway, Pierre, I've probably rambled on long enough. I hope that answers some of your questions. If not, shoot me a message. And like I said, it's someday, somewhere, hopefully, sooner than later, I'll be able to actually put a nice little video series together around this and the various moving parts. Or at the very least, I'll do some documentation so that people have a better understanding of what's here. Cool. All right. Have a great weekend, and go team!